What's up, Youthfull family? Gary here, back with the next story. So, we got everything we need. Let's roll the intro and go. Alright, guys, so for today's thought, I really want to talk about what is a king, or what makes a king specifically, because it's been rolling around in my head, and it's really the question really boils down to, when we look at the different kings in the Bible, what makes them good examples, right? What makes a good example versus what makes a bad example? So, the two that I want to talk about a little bit, right, are King Saul and King David, right? Because these are two really well-known characters from the Bible, right? And Saul is usually held up as an example of failure and what not to do, and David is held up as an example of righteousness and what to do, right? Good versus bad, all of that. So I want to talk about what the difference is between the two of them and what really makes David a good example versus Saul not a good example. Because if you look at them from the surface, right, like if you just look at their purely human qualifications, who they were, where they came from, what made them them, Saul should have been the better king. Just saying it. By all human guidelines or reasoning, Saul should have been the better king. He was tall, good-looking, strong. Everybody respected him to a degree, right? He didn't even want to be king at first, so he didn't want power. He wanted to just be a normal person, right? All of these things that add up to he should have been the best choice for a king there could be, which is why God chose him. He was the best option at that point. And if you look at David, he was the youngest out of his family. He was the one that tended the sheep, so he was off on the side, so he, didn't have, the interaction and the upbringing, you would say, to rule a country, because he was the sheep farmer. So here's the thing, though, right? Because Saul, on one hand, should be the perfect king. David, on the other hand, by all intents, shouldn't have been anything. And yet, Saul is remembered forever as being a failure, and David is remembered forever as being a success. And why is that? It all comes down to one word: responsibility. Saul, when he would make a mistake, wouldn't own up to his mistakes. He wouldn't take responsibility for what he did. Whereas David, when he made mistakes, and he made tons of mistakes, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy that saw a lady taking a bath, was like, and literally had her husband killed so that he could marry her, right? That's the kind of guy we're talking about. And yet he's held up as this beacon of success. If you read, throughout all of, the Bible, it's always talking about King David in a positive light for the most part. And it's because when he made mistakes, he would own up to his mistake and run to God saying, okay, I screwed up. Help me. Now, does that mean that when he ran to God that he didn't have to face the consequences of his actions? Absolutely not. So when David would make mistakes, when we make mistakes, there will be consequences to those mistakes, and we'll have to face that. But if we go to God, God's always going to be there to help pick you back up and put you on your feet again. And that's the key part. That's why David is viewed as a success, right? And this is especially hard for us today because in our culture, right, whether you like it or not, the culture you're in is going to affect you. It's going to be for good and bad, right? There is all of it. If you look at the music, the movies, just the way people dress, talk, and act, right? Culture affects you. And the culture right now is this culture of lack of responsibility. This culture of that what I do isn't important, right? What I do doesn't affect others. Look at how, swatting, right? If you don't know what swatting is, it's basically when you get so mad at somebody else that you call 911 pretending to be a person at that address, the person that you actually are mad at, to get the SWAT team to come break their door down and hassle them because the police think there's an actual emergency. Like, we live in a culture where it's okay, or not okay, but where people think it's okay, and that's the crazy part. People think it's okay to do these heinous, immature, just reckless actions, like, calling police with a fake report to get them to mess with somebody. We live in a culture where there is this prevailing sense that there is no responsibility for my actions. It's not my fault. It's what's around me. You don't have to take responsibility, and that's what we live in. And that's the challenge, because if you look at what actually makes somebody a good example, what actually makes somebody a success so they don't get hung up on these, every little mistake, it's when they own up to it and they take responsibility. So it flies directly in the face of the culture that we currently have. So kind of the thought comes down to, what kind of a person do you want to be? What kind of example do you want to be? Whose example do you want to follow? And my point that I want to make to all of you is that we all are going to make mistakes all the time. We all are going to fall flat on our face. We're all going to mess up. We're all going to make wrong decisions. We're all going to choose poorly, right? Our failures don't define us, right? Everybody fails. Our failures don't define us. What defines us is what you do in the face of failure. What defines us, what makes us successful, what makes us somebody worthy of being a good example, is how we handle our failures. How we handle a situation where we mess up and it's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant and it's everything in us is saying avoid responsibility for what you did. But we still say, yeah, I did that. I will face the consequence of my action and I will move forward. That's the counterculture idea that we need to be pushing, that we need to be attaching ourselves to, that we need to be following. Because that's what's going to set us apart. That's what's going to be an example to those around us. Because the thing is, when you make an action, when you take a stand, and one way or another, whether you mean to or not, everything you do is taking a stand on something. Right? You're either taking a stand for or against something. You're either actively for it or you're indifferent and against it. Right? No matter what you do, you are taking a stand, whether you want to or not. And if you aren't taking a stand on the Word of God, if you aren't taking responsibility for what you do, if you aren't learning and growing from your own actions, your own situations, the things that you have done, you're sitting stagnant. You're in one place. You're not moving forward. You're going to stay there or move backwards. And that's not a place that I want to be. So the challenge, because we always have a challenge. Life is a challenge. The challenge is to think about, what actions am I doing? That one, I should probably change, but what actions am I doing that I am avoiding responsibility for, that I shouldn't? How can I take ownership of not only the good things I do, but also the bad things I do, so I can learn and grow? And if we do that, we'll be able to change the culture that we're in, because your actions have an effect. What you do matters, and it affects those around you. And so if we can change our behavior to be more like David, who, let's be honest, my screw-ups are more in line with the screw-ups that David had as compared to the screw-ups that Saul had. Like, if you look at them side by side, David screwed up in worse ways a lot more often than Saul did. But Saul never took responsibility for what he screwed up. He blamed other people, he blamed his circumstances, he blamed everything around him other than that he made a bad choice. Whereas David, when he made a bad choice, he took responsibility for it. And he's like, yep, I screwed that thing up. And he faced the consequences, and he had a lot of pain and suffering that he didn't need to go through because of that. But he also had a lot of benefit because he kept running back to God, and that's why we remember David as a success. not as much because of the actions he did, but because of how he recovered from the failures he had. Anyway, guys, that's it for this week. We're going to come back to you next week with another thought. I'm trying to get the other leaders of Youthfull up on here as well. Wait for them. They'll be there in a little bit. Anyway, we'll see you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, have a great day.